we need as SEOs to stop thinking about traffic drivers. SEO is traffic driving. I mean, really, that should have been out of your mind a long time ago, because traffic means nothing if it doesn't convert into something, or it doesn't get rewarded for why it was sent there in the first place. That's everything from informational through to transactional. So I think what you'll see again with the LLMs, with Bard and ChatGPT, there probably will be less clicks through to websites, but anybody who thought Google was invented to send traffic to their website, that was not the reason that they started. So the likelihood is you are going to see less clicks, but we've talked about this zero click phenomenon as it appears to be. If I ask Google, what's the weather today? I don't want to have to click and go to a website to find out it's 75 degrees. Just tell me that, kind of thing. How do you make the most out of that? Just make sure that you're IBM and you give the result, or because they own the Weather Channel. And if I ask for the football results, just make sure you're the sponsor and you're responsible for giving that zero click result. There are ways and means to think about that.
You are listening to Power Marketing with Kevin Lee. Kevin and his agency Did It have helped thousands of businesses win through superior marketing, as have his books, articles, speaking engagements, and the eMarketing Association Power Marketing podcasts. Here's Kevin.
For those of you who don't know Mike Grehen, he and I are both old timers in the search marketing space. I started, I guess, thinking about web visibility before it was really web visibility, when I produced the floppy disk-based digital press kit for the movie Disclosure, and we decided to also release it on CompuServe, AOL, and Prodigy before there was really much in the way of a web, although Netscape, I think, existed at the time. And Mike's been doing web visibility as long as any search engines have existed as well. So I think it gives us a unique position to talk about the next generation of content visibility and web visibility, and the interaction between sort of LLMs and the future of web visibility, or just say digital visibility, because this could include people interacting with things like voice-based devices, which could be on their mobile device or in their home. So we'll start off, with a topic that I think is really interesting, because it hits both sides of the ecosystem, which is the idea of copyright is based on the fact that a human created something. And then, as you mentioned in our prep conversation, right, most pieces of content in the artistic world were inspired by previous content in some way, right? Because that's how the human brain works. And the LLM is modeled to work a little bit like, especially the deep learning side is modeled to work a little bit like that. So we've got copyright issues as it relates to LLMs ingesting content and using it to answer questions or even create new content. And then you've got the fact that the Copyright Office, at least in the United States, has said that you can't actually copyright something if it was generated by an AI, which, of course, all those boilerplate footers that you see on all these content sites may actually be not, in fact, copyright protected, because as people increase their reliance on AI to at least formulate some initial thoughts about that content, nobody knows exactly where the line is as to how much of the human intervention or involvement in that content creation happens. So any thoughts on the two sides of that equation? One is obviously content creators want to get paid when they were humans. And then on the other side is, okay, well, what if a human did 48% of the work, but the LLM did a little bit more than that, and then vice versa, right? At what point, if Grammarly is just correcting it for me, I sort of feel like that's still me, right? But if I'm using Bard or ChatGPT or one of the other engines to inspire me about what to create, and it's doing a lot of the lifting, I don't think the law has decided yet sort of where that line is.
So it's an interesting thing, because even though we're talking about the newest area of development and technology right now, this is a problem that we've had going back hundreds of years in terms of, some folk singer in a small town in Germany playing a lute in a local tavern or something like that as Mozart was going by and thinking, that's a nice tune, you know. And then the following day, writing some symphony based around this tune, you know, and he gets paid all of the money for that. And maybe the guy that was playing the lute doesn't know anything about it. Even if he did, how's he going to get paid for it, you know? And then as you go into other areas of distribution, you know, coming through history, you know, we talked about radio before. I worked in radio for 10 years. And during that period of time, as I mentioned to you earlier on, people don't realize this, that you do have to make a note of every single track that's being played on the radio station itself. You make a note of the performer, yeah, the label that's actually distributed. But more importantly, you have to put the name of the composers in there, yeah. So you put all of that data in there, then it goes back. And then you have ASCAP here in the US, which is one of those kind of organizations that deals with the distribution of you know, all of these people getting paid something in
Yeah,
terms of
royalties.
royalties on
Yeah.
how they get it back. Yeah, so anybody can be a member of ASCAP if you're a musician, but that doesn't mean the little guy with the lute in Germany is going to get anywhere near the amount of money that Taylor Swift is getting. Now, how the hell did they work that one out? You know, that in itself is a bit of a mystery. You know, people don't realize if you go into just a local bar and there's a jukebox and they still exist, they're still in there, and you start playing the music, the artist has to be paid for that particular play on a jukebox. You know, how does all that get recorded? So you know, without getting too deep into that rabbit hole of you know, of royalties and how are we going to get paid back, it's not something that we haven't got other areas to look at and see, well, you know, how did they sort of try and figure some of that out? So there's a place to start. But at the end of the day, you know, when a machine takes your content, as we were talking about, and we've talked a lot about this, Kevin. If it's a purely machine learning basis, there's a big difference between, you know, pure machine learning and then the deeper end of artificial intelligence, which is deep learning based around these neural networks. So in a machine learning sense, whether you're looking at an LLM or whether you're getting web results back, they're usually from the same source. It's from a web crawl. So they're pulling the content from the same place. With an LLM, when you ask for you know, a question to be answered, and it comes back with, you know, three levels of, it could be this, it could be that, it could be the other. Has that content actually been scraped and just repositioned? Yes. Or using machine learning, doing what it does, which is literally in this huge vector space that it lives in, just predicting, because it's seen this data before, what the next word is likely to be, you know. So I could have read, you know, three different ways of explaining how to fasten a shoelace. Yeah. And then if I put those together and explain it in one sentence, who did I steal it from, or was it my own? Answer me that. And also explain how to fasten a shoelace. I was never very good.
Well, you know, for those folks on the webinar, and we've got about 44 folks listening at the moment. You know, I think it's probably useful to just to take a step back and, you know, explain to folks how the LLMs are built, right? They're probabilistic models that use ingested content to take their best guess as to the next word in the case of word strings, and then analyze fairly complex questions and try to impute what the proper answers are. And they're far from perfect. They sometimes end up ingesting content that's wrong. Sometimes they look at content that's factual, but then they impute wrongly. I think it was really fun that there was a hallucination that I happened to find relating to Did It and its litigation with Overture, where the barred answer, I wish, was the answer of what actually happened in that litigation. But it really made the whole thing up, made for a really good movie as to what Bard thought happened. It was not really that close to reality. But the interesting thing is, obviously, everyone whose content is being crawled wants that to get paid for that content. But the other element of sort of created work is we've already seen evidence of some really of the SERPs getting dirty, right? Where the stuff that's being out there produced and then is getting crawled by Bing and Google and others is actually AI generated content, and sometimes has not even been moderated or checked by a human, but it's sort of pure AI spam, and then that goes right back in and gets re-ingested by by the crawlers, both the regular Google crawlers, but as well as the LLMs. So there was some talk about watermarking, right, at some point, where the thinking was that the largest LLMs would start watermarking content that was created so that it couldn't end up being essentially an ongoing content creation engine that just spits right back the same stuff, and it gets slightly different recreations every time. Do you feel like watermarking is the solution for this, or do you feel like that's just them trying to scare people away from using AI generated content to populate their websites?
So, I mean, in the sense that as far as Google's concerned, when it comes down to the use of, generating content, AI generated content, I've spoken to a couple of guys there. I was at a conference just towards the end of last year, and speaking to some of the guys on the team, support team there. Generally speaking, the word is they don't care where you begin with your content. At the end of the day, as long as the end user is satisfied. I mean, at the end of the day, for them, their only interest is providing the most relevant result, the best user experience they can to the end user, regardless of where it comes from. But if you just keep kicking out stuff that's generated with AI, there's not a lot of personality there. It's very difficult to say, I like the sound of ChatGPT's voice. It doesn't have one. You still have to give it one, kind of thing. And I think the other thing is as well, there are a lot of changes. For 25 years, Google's been evolving technology to help them master the science of information retrieval. And much as they're most frequently seen as the leader in the field, search is still not a solved problem, Kevin. Even with the huge leaps and bounds Google has taken over the past decade, the advances are getting more impressive. The time between new technology rollouts is getting shorter and shorter, but there is still a lot to be achieved. But there is something also important to remember. The spam thing aside, I think, generally the more that you've used a search engine, the more that you can detect, oh, this smells a bit fake, as you go along, kind of thing. But with some of the changes that we're going to see because of the technology, they're not all going to happen instantly, because the end users, unlike us guys sitting here talking technology all day, they're not the early adopters. It sometimes takes them a long time. I was just talking about this the other day. Google Lens, if you think about that, when that came, it was a very cool feature. I mean, using an image as the query as opposed to text, and then receiving image results that say, these are the shoes you're looking at. You can buy them here. They cost this much. Fantastic. Google handles about 12 billion of those types of searches. That's fantastic. But it's taken nearly 3 years for that to build. So I think what we're going to learn as we go along, yes, there will be some spam, there will be these anomalies as Google itself begins to learn as it goes along. But what will happen is the end user will eventually begin to catch up, and we will change the way that we handle that funnel where they go from informational to navigational to transactional to provide the best kind of user experience, whatever that will be.
Yeah,
I think
for sure.
one of the very important areas to think about is that generative AI is given opportunities and leveled the playing field on the creative side. So whether it's just getting some, write me a poem that, like, something that Shakespeare would write, or write me some sales copy kind of thing, down to even putting together your social media campaigns. If you think about this, I mean, I use Creative Cloud, Adobe's Creative Cloud, and if you look at Adobe Express, AI, I can put together a campaign for social media within seconds. And I hate to say this to my dear friend Jamie, a guy that you also know, but he used to get paid for doing that. I can just press a button. But I think
But just think
what
about how much more clever the Nigerian Prince spam will be. It'll be articulate, and it'll be really well written.
it'll be a special video with world famous actors. But you will be able to do that. I think the two areas that I think from a pure SEO point of view where it's going to change, which is basically where we started talking about this session, is that the World Wide Web, it still feels like 1999 when I say those words, you know. Should have a different name for this now. But it is this huge ocean of unstructured data. So the stuff that we've been doing as SEOs to try and help Google algorithms to understand what this content is about, you know, they're getting better and better at that. But as the content itself becomes a bit more complex, and by that I'm talking about much richer kinds of content where we'll be using AR, VR, more AR than anything else. That's when you'll find that Google, other search engines generally are asking for access to your camera, to your microphone, to give this kind of out of the browser experience, this much richer kind of experience. And that's where structured data will become important again, because structured data by its nature is designed for machine learning to begin with. So I think we're going to see these new types of content coming around, providing great opportunities, certainly a lot of competition, but then a much closer connection between that HTML unstructured data and the structured data that you're providing to give a much stronger signal to Google. So I think there are
Yeah,
certainly some positives, but there are certainly some warning signs in terms of how ready are you for this, you know?
Yeah, I think one key takeaway that's been true ever since, Lycos and Alta Vista and Excite were replaced by Google is if you, as the content creator or as the agency advising marketers, if you put the needs of the consumer or the searcher first, right, and delight them with your content, even if it was there was a little bit of assistance from an AI, that's still what Google's going to be looking for, right? They're looking for all sorts of feedback signals that help them understand that a specific piece of content actually delighted the consumer. And if they can be confident about that, they're going to positively rank that content. And if they're not confident of that, they won't in a typical SERP, right? Of course, we're all sort of seeing that there may be certain types of queries where the SERP is replaced by a chatbot result, right? And so I was sort of having conversations with folks in the industry and yourself about sort of where do we think that Google might be most willing to disintermediate themselves, right? Because they don't want the SERP to go away. That's where all their money comes from, is the ads in the SERP. And we haven't really seen examples of, replacements for that in a one result answer type of scenario. But certainly when you think about voice related conversation that one has with a mobile device in a house or with one's smartphone, that would seem like the obvious place for, in particular, Google, but potentially also Amazon with Alexa to suddenly leapfrog themselves and dramatically improve that experience. So do you see that as probably the first place that they'll be willing to deploy, single result answers that are fully AI enhanced?
So I think that two things, just taking a step back, that Google's always looked at end user data. And I've been saying this for a long time. People just say clicks. No, it's not just clicks. It's actually about access patterns of how you reach certain types of content. So Google's fully aware of, what end users are really appreciating. At the end of the day, they're not looking at a document like, in SEO world, as we said before, it needs an H1 tag and your CSS is terrible and blah. The end user doesn't see any of that. They just get the content experience. So given that Google can understand and manage all of that, why would it show you a piece of content that wasn't as popular as the ones that people are looking at because it had better code or it had better this, that, or the other? And then that you have to take this into account as well, that the SERPs, as we see them, changed when we had this thing called universal search, okay? And what that did was cause a little bit of mud in the water for the SEO world, because they say, my competitor, my web page is at number 5. My competitor has a video at number 3. I want to beat him. Make my web page beat him. Well, no, you have to make another video because that's an apple and an orange. Seriously. So we're talking about something, an area within machine learning, which is called learning to rank. And if you do a search for that, now the first area that Google made this huge leap was with Rank Brain. And that's what it was all about, to be able to take a look, not just at how all web pages are ranked and videos are ranked and PDFs and everything, images, how they're all ranked individually. Then how do you put them into the SERPs in an order that the end user wants to see? Well, there's no secret there. The end user decides that because there's a difference between ranking and sorting. And in the sorting process, Google begins to detect that a video seems to be the best result. A 30-second video is the best result for this query, or, 150-page PDF document is the best result for this particular query. And that's how it begins to build up. And that's why I say we have to be careful looking at these newer types of content, because the end user, even though, as I said before, they're not usually ahead of the curve, once they have had this richer end user experience. If you take a look in social media, certainly take a look at Snap and some of the stuff that Snap is doing with their user base, which is all about AR. Those kind of experiences are going to become more important. So then beginning to think about the journey that the person goes on, whether we call that the customer journey, whether it's a funnel. I don't think funnels exist, whether it's the taxonomy, informational, navigational, transactional. What you will be able to do, given that you have an opportunity now to generate different user experiences, is have a different experience at each stage of that particular journey.
Yeah, and that's a great point because part of that is Google imputing the person's actual desires, right? And for the most part, the areas where they would impute the desire most heavily were around location, right? And that's where the SERP tends to change. If they impute that you have local intent, they'll actually change the SERP fairly radically based on even where I am that day and what device I'm on at the moment. Whereas sort of more informational queries that don't have a hyperlocal intent are less likely to be quite as different, right? They're still deciding how much to intermingle between a video result, a news result, et cetera, for universal search. When we move towards this idea of sort of hyper-personalization and the AI single result replacing in some instances the SERP, I get a lot of questions from clients like, well, wait a minute, what if a person's asking for, what's the best conference hotel in Midtown Manhattan, right? And someone's asking an AI, right? They're asking Bard, they're asking ChatGPT or one of the other newer ones. In that case, there's the old concept of rank is out the window. It's binary. You're either there or you're not. And even the same male LLM asked 10 minutes apart because of which servers end up getting queried. It's not even something that is repeatable or consistent, right? But it's probabilistic, right? So you do have an opportunity to influence your odds of showing up as the Marriott Marquis potentially being the answer, or the Hilton being the answer to that query about what's the best conference hotel in Midtown Manhattan. And the way I've been explaining it to clients is you want to be ubiquitous in all the LLM ingested content, right? So that suddenly changes the question about how do I get my domain to rank, to how do I make sure that all the places that could possibly speak positively about me are doing so, right? So that I'm going to influence the LLM to change the odds in my favor, which actually ends up looking a lot more like barnacle SEO, as we used to call it, right? Which is, I want to control the entire SERP, right? Well, the same thing you would do to control the entire SERP would be a digital PR strategy and a content syndication strategy. And oddly enough, that tends to also positively impact your odds in an LLM. So I've been telling people to really think much more from a social media content, from a general content, from an owned media, an owned content perspective. Really think about, make sure you're syndicating your great content out, and don't just have it sit in that one place on your location. And I don't know if you have any thoughts to add to that.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the SERPs are going to change and the way that we expect. I mean, at the end of the day, this is all about satisfying the human need for information, and that can come in any shape or format, you know? So I don't think that everything is going to be I mean, you mentioned the difference in results. Now that we all have one of these, previously we would talk about, we create some content and Google has 200 signals. Man, that's ancient. That was a static way of trying to rank where it's totally fluid now, which is why RankBrain changed everything. But then you have the context, who I am, where I am, what time of day it is, all of these filters that go on to make sure that I get something that is really relevant in terms of what it is that I need to know. But then again, you have to think about the way that we use our devices as well. So the term multimodal keeps turning up over and over again. And one area you can get this content from will be Google, having crawled the web and the content that we place there. But absolutely, as you say, from a pure integrated marketing point of view, you need to be wherever it is that you possibly can be to have people talking about, like when you're building a brand. I mean, if you were the CMO of a huge global brand and you said, we're only going to do PR this year, they'd be like, what? Well, we're only going to, yeah, you do whatever it is that you possibly can to keep the buzz going with that brand. So here's an interesting thing. If you take a look at what Google's just done by introducing perspectives, and if you take a look at what that is, you're asking a question and they're saying, what do other people think about that? They're now pulling stuff out of forums and other social, conversational sites like Quora and Reddit have really benefited from that to begin with. So you want to be having the conversation in other places that people are talking about you. But at the same time, when you think about artificial intelligence, we're talking about it specifically just in the SEO sense, so we can focus on that. But just leave that to one side for a second. Given the device that we've just looked at, most of the studies that are done with your phone, yeah, it's actually about 60% service and 40% search. What's the difference between service and search? Well, that's whether you look for it manually or you ask Siri or Google Assistant to do something for you, right? And that, whether that's, send a text for me or tell me what the weather is, or those kind of things, there's a lot of stuff that's going on where you're asking for service, not for search. I called this concierge style search a long time ago, and it still works. Still the same kind of thing. We'll go back to your Midtown hotel. If you're in a Midtown hotel and you're used to staying there and you know who the concierge is, you'll say, Frank, book me and three of my clients for dinner tonight at the local steakhouse. Nobody needs to search for that. You get some service. If you're at a similar hotel in Seattle and you don't know the area and you don't know the concierge, you'll ask the concierge and he will search and find the kind of restaurant that you want. So when I use my device, so for instance, if I was looking for a restaurant in Manhattan, I don't want Google to search for a restaurant. I want OpenTable, the app that's on my phone, to book the restaurant, give me my points, and make sure that I get booked into the correct restaurant. So you're going to have to think about, as a marketer, multimodal in terms of the way that we use our devices and the way that we look to bring this information in. And we've mentioned, conversational is coming back in again. If you look, Forrester has a report out now talking more about conversational. Wow, did we talk about that a lot when voice search was a big thing, if you remember that 4 or 5 years ago, whatever it is. So even that is still there in the background and it's building. But at the end of the day, I've got like 100 apps on my phone. I can do 10 or 20 searches a day, but I'd rather just ask the device, do all this stuff for me. So going forward, we're going to have something that we will call an information provider now, and there'll be a much cooler name for it. I just don't know what it is. And Google will be in the mix, but not the most important. Google will just be in there in the mix. And then I will get this multimodal return. And then just to finish on something that you mentioned before that's important, you may not believe this, but I wrote a column about the single result about 18 years ago, because in information retrieval terms, in the science, that is the ultimate goal. Yeah, it's not to take away your choice, but just to know, we know exactly what you want, and this is it. You don't know this is what you want, but guess what? We only discovered it by looking at your behavior. So from your previous behavior, we can give you that one result. And not only that, using AI, you will sometimes get that result without even asking for it. So,
Yeah, I mean, that actually brings up a fascinating layer, right? Which we probably would need to have an entirely separate webinar on, which is the more that a concierge style AI or an assistant knows about your specific preferences, the more it can delight you. But that has
yep.
privacy implications because the more information I give some third party about my interests and needs, right now there's at least three big players that know a hell of a lot about me. There's Google, there's Amazon, and there's Meta, right? And each of them have completely different data sets because they have gotten their data in very different ways, right? But they can each delight me by knowing the nuances of my specific preferences, which none of the chat GPT or LLMs are taking into account, right, at this
No.
point. But you can certainly see in the future when it comes to a concierge style result or interaction with data providers and a data lake, which includes data providers like OpenTable and Expedia, where it can actually make the match and consummate the deal on my behalf.
Yeah.
Right? I think we're probably going to see some significant um, advances there because to some extent they solve the economic problem that Google and Bing have, which is, oh well, then I get a piece of the action.
Yeah, so there are a couple of interesting things there, Kevin. One, again, I go back to some of the conversations that I had a long time ago. I wrote the first book on SEO about 24 years ago, whatever it is. Including a lot about information retrieval, which is the science that Google uses, as you know. And I've been a member of ACM, which is the world's largest computing society. And inside ACM, I'm a member of the special interest group for information retrieval. And like I say, we start to look at what would be the greatest thing that you could achieve in information retrieval is if somebody asked for something, just give them that thing, not 10 or 20 things, just give them that thing because you know what it is. And then in order to be able to do that, you've just touched on that from a scientific point of view. I used to say, people look at Google, when it was brand new and they go, it's a black box and nobody knows what goes on inside this black box. And I say, and Google's looking at you, and you are a black box, and it has no idea what's going on inside you. Now, the minute you start sharing some information, all of a sudden, things become a lot more relevant and the results become a lot more richer. So you have to be able to provide that kind of data in order to get that kind of result, I mean, apart from anything else, at the end of the day, your credit card company knows more about you than even your doctor does. You've done it before, you've given it away. Insofar as what was the final thing you touched on there?
Well,
Sorry, I
just
went off
just the,
tangent.
the privacy implications, right? Because you've got certain governments, like the EU and at the state level that are sort of and advocates of sort of sounding alarms of privacy. But it's fascinating because to some extent the ability of the tech providers in general to continue to delight me is predicated on that quid pro quo, right? Where I give them
Yep.
more information about me and they understand which color sweater I will want, right? Instead of forcing me to go through fuchsia, like I'm not going to buy that one. But if I have to go through and dig through, it's more work on me. And so if I'm like a staunch privacy advocate and I've chosen to share, to be forgotten constantly by the tech providers that I use, I'm going to have a crappy user experience. Whereas the person who's like, oh, listen, I'm an open book, like, the more they know about me, the better. They're the ones who have the opportunity to be much more delighted by whichever tech stack they choose, whether it's Amazon or whatever Meta ends up coming up with, or Google's next gen or Microsoft's next gen under Bing, right, with ChatGPT powering it. It sort of creates this interesting challenge for the consumer is, well, what would you like? Would you like to be, 80% more likely to be satisfied, or would you like to be private?
Or do you like fuchsia?
Exactly. Or do you want to have to go through and,
You-
pick the 16 colors, go dig through and find, your favorite color?
It's a kind of an interesting thing because, throughout our normal lives, we have to think about who we mix with, who we're going to share information with, those kind of things. And we are adults. I think we need to be, digital grown-ups. There is going to be this trade-off, but if you end up with the best experience, then yeah, I mean, that people seem to have is not so much the sharing of the data, but it's what happens with the data afterwards, and whether that company gets hacked and those kind of things. But when you look at AI, it's purely based on looking at routines and habits and things that you do in order to be able to provide all of this extra experience. So at the end of the day, if you think about it and you want some service, and you ask the question, where is the best pizza restaurant near me? I'm not telling you who I am. I'm not telling you where I am. I'm not telling you what time it is. I'm not
Yes, and if I like
the answer to
deep
that,
dish or thin
the answer to
crust,
that is
right?
look out the window.
Yep, yep. Switching gears a bit, I found it interesting as I looked at Google's last two fairly material updates, the helpful content update and the reviews update, both of which were unusually material in the percentages of sites in those categories that got either positively or negatively impacted. Um, you can sort of use that to sort of think through what the engineering teams at Google might be dealing with, right? Because to some extent, if you overlay on those changes the AI ecosystem, particularly as it relates to content creation, it seems like they're really starting to put an additional premium on content that is unique and new in comparison to content that is a rehash, which of course AI content tends to be, for the most part, a rehash, whereas content that is unique and new is different in some way and is helpful, or in a reviews context is new and helpful at the same time. So, any thoughts as to whether you think that that potentially was one of the drivers of those two rather significant algorithmic changes that we all saw in the industry in the last 3 months?
So I think from a technical point of view, if you take a look at some of the really huge changes that have taken place in the past decade, those are greater than what happened in the 15 years before. And the gap between is becoming shorter and shorter. And that's because Google is becoming closer to natural language, in terms of the way that it looks at content now and understands content. That's the important thing, as opposed to the keyword before. So the keyword is kind of still important in the sense that the keyword points it to in the direction of where the content is, even if the keyword itself doesn't appear there. So, understanding that, if I use the term fish tank and they give me a website that's all about tropical fish aquarium, those fish tank, those words didn't appear, but knowing exactly through various techniques that they've learned that that's what I wanted to see. But since BERT came around, and this is what they call a sentence transformer, and these transformers have changed everything. So the way that Google is moving so quickly towards understanding more about what a sentence is, as opposed to this bag of words that a website was before. It just has all of these words that appear on the page. Don't know what they mean, but they all appear there, so it must be relevant, kind of thing. So I think, with the helpful content, they're actually able to as they're doing, take the query and then look at sentences and give a similarity score in terms of the meaning of the sentence, as opposed to do these words appear in that sentence. So yeah, you're going to see a lot of new things that are turning up because the understanding of the meaning, therefore the context and the relevancy of the content is important. This brings us back to something which we've all been saying, certainly you and I have been saying for years and years, right for humans, not for machines. Because the way that Google is looking at stuff now, yeah, understanding more about the language that's being used, the meaning behind the language. So here's my big takeaway for everybody: write as you speak. Right? Don't write just to include keywords. Just write as you speak and be as helpful and as concise as you can.
And that actually leads me to my next point, which was, I'm convinced that one of the next big corpuses of data that which will be, if it's not already being ingested by the LLMs, will be the transcripts of YouTube videos and podcasts where people speak, right? And it's a different dynamic in the way that information is being shared when you and I are having a discussion versus if we were to sit down and write an article for one of the industry trade publications or our own blog, right? And so that information, that content, I believe, because at least for the next 6 months is going to be more difficult to fake. Not that we couldn't create AI versions of ourselves to have this conversation, but for the time being, it's actually a source of content for ChatGPT, for Google, and for anyone else who chooses to ingest it that is more likely to be authentic at this point, right? Because humans are saying it, right? And there will come a time where it can be deep faked. But for now, this is a great corpus of information, and I do not know to what extent, all the Apple podcasts, all the Spotify podcasts, and all the broadcast radio is currently being transcribed and ingested. But it is part of my digital footprint strategy for any client, right? Like, make sure that you're everywhere, right? And if it makes sense for you to be on a podcast, be on a podcast. If it makes sense for you to be creating videos for the second largest search engine in the world, YouTube, then go ahead and do that.
So it kind of works both ways, but for sure, there's when you think about the capabilities that Google has in terms of crawling the web, this is a hugely expensive thing, by the way. This is the most expensive thing that they do. There are trillions and trillions of URLs that Google has seen now, but they'll never be able to crawl. There are so many of them. I've said a few times, if they try to crawl them all, we'll all be dead by the time they get to the end, kind of thing. So trying to keep it all fresh. But then the types of content and understanding how that content is being consumed by the end user. As I said before, the difference between ranking and sorting. Is a video a better result for this? Is an image better than a web page? Those kind of things. But they've always been able to index audio. But then all of a sudden, out of the blue, it seems to everybody, the podcast is the new thing. Why did they do that? Well, they could do that, and certainly there was a bit more interest in podcasts, that's for sure. But there's the training data for natural language processing. That's where the training data is. And these transformers that I was talking about before can do this both ways. They can take that spoken word, okay, and then turn it into text and see what it looks like that way, the same way that they can take text and turn that into the spoken word. And I do believe that because we were talking about, how will we access and consume data? A lot of it will not just be going to an oblong box on a white page that has Google on it, typing in keywords. It will just be talking to your device, So the universal kind of interface between you and all of your devices initially is going to be voice, and then if you have to, you'll type and those kind of things. So I think a lot more content that comes back in the future. In terms of the SERPs, as we said before, organics, if you take a look at that, it used to be just like the 10 blue links and it was web pages with text on them. It's becoming much more visual. It's becoming much more rich in terms of what those results are, which is why I'm saying, for those e-commerce sites that will be able to create AR experiences so that I can try on, Warby Parker do it with spectacles now. Those kind of results are going to become much more important. And most of those results, you'll just be asking for them. And can I have access to your camera and your microphone? The conversation will continue. And can I try another pair on, It's pretty exciting, actually.
Well, a lot of there's a couple of folks on in their RSVP list that are very interested in the future of AI and Google and the other search engines from a monetization perspective. So obviously the blue links and the ones that are ads have been sort of the foundation for search monetization for a long time. And there are all sorts of potential options. They never really figured out how to monetize voice search, other than giving you a SERP to interact with. As if they deemed there to be commercial intent, Google would send you to the SERP on your mobile device and not answer the question for you, right? And that was just a way to preserve their revenue. So other than becoming the sort of, assistant that is the glue that like books your Expedia or your Delta flight or that restaurant or whatever it is, any other thoughts on where sponsorship monies might wiggle their way into the AI-driven content ecosystem?
Yeah, I do. I do. And Google's already testing this as they usually ahead. Like I say, they're ahead of the consumer, but they'll start and bring it in when the demand becomes greater for it. So the reason that it was difficult to monetize voice search is because if I'm driving and I ask a question, I can't look at your ad or click. There's nothing to click on, to begin with. So forget the click. People talked about being PPC being pay per command or something like that. But what Google did instead, and this is answers two questions, by the way, monetizing and where is AI in search going in the future? You will see, first of all, a leaning towards more information to create task completion. And you kind of touched on it just a little bit there. And task completion is this, where I just say to my device, I need to be in San Francisco from the 12th to the 19th. Arrange it for me. And instead of like a search engine coming back and saying, here's a list of flights, choose one. Yeah. Here's a list of hotels, choose one. It will actually book the Uber, the flight, the hotel based on previous history, knowing what time I have to be there by. Yeah, all of those things. Yeah. So task completion is going to be important. AI is absolutely moving in that direction as opposed to just saying, here, you choose these things. No, I'll do the whole thing for you. So that's really important. How does Google make money out of that? Well, given that Google might send me, if it's Google that's doing it, I say I want a restaurant nearby that serves whatever it is, and then sends me or gives me the listing and the advice from OpenTable, then that's an affiliate fee. I'll take a commission on the sale. So transaction. So Google will start and move, and they're already doing this. And in fact, they started doing a little bit with OpenTable to see how it would work, and in certain other areas where instead of them saying, "Give me some money for the click," just give me some commission off the sale if I send a customer to you. So I don't know that that means that Google's going to become Amazon's biggest affiliate marketer, or but certainly the leaning for these voice interactions as opposed to tactile clicks and those kind of things, it will be in commissions in an affiliate kind of sense.
Right, right. And it does interestingly bring us back to the fact that the people who are going to be sharing the least amount of information with their AI assistants will be the ones who will have to go through and make every choice in every step because they'll have to be, deciding which airline to use and deciding which time of day to pick when the with the flights and making the decisions between price and a nonstop versus a direct flight. They'll have to be engaging the human brain as opposed to whose ever brain you can rent to help you make the best choice if you've shared your preferences with it. So I do anticipate there'll be some significant advances, and I think we're agreed on that there'll be some significant advances in the next year or two as it relates to people's interaction with what we might currently call a search engine. But I think, even that word will become a bit of a misnomer in the
Yeah,
next
I don't
year.
think we should use it now. Like I said, I talk about the information provider. I've been talking about that for a long time because it's multimodal. I mean, Google has access to a lot of information, but it doesn't have even access to all the information on the web. And what about the stuff that's not on the web? And there's a lot of that that exists elsewhere. So I think from a multimodal point of view, yes, you'll be having all of this. So as marketers, we have to think much more about integrated marketing to be in all of these places because I won't be getting everything from just one particular source. And I think the other important thing is we need as SEOs to stop thinking about traffic drivers. SEO is traffic driving. I mean, really, that should have been out of your mind a long time ago because traffic means nothing if it doesn't convert into something or it doesn't get rewarded for why it was sent there in the first place. That's everything from informational through to transactional. So I think what you'll see again with the LLMs, with Bard and ChatGPT, there probably will be less clicks through to websites. But anybody who thought Google was invented to send traffic to their website, that was not the reason that they started. So the likelihood is you are going to see less clicks, but we've talked about this zero click phenomenon as it appears to be. If I ask Google, what's the weather today? I don't want to have to click and go to a website to find out it's 75 degrees. Just tell me that, kind of thing. How do you make the most out of that? Just make sure that you're IBM and you give the result, or because they own the Weather Channel. And if I ask for the football results, just make sure you're the sponsor and you're responsible for giving that zero click result. There are ways and means to think about that. I do honestly think that, again, it'll go back to the more personalization. The more that the information provider knows about you, the more chance that that person who's trying to service you in some way, he's likely to meet with you because you're a perfect pair. There's a similarity score of a different kind.
Yeah, yep, absolutely. And I do think, at least in the short to intermediate term, it's going to be even more important that marketers are working with agencies and professionals that understand this multi-layered, multifaceted, future of information interaction between the consumer and where that marketer might sit, right? Because even if you think about open table, right? Well, then does open table get disintermediated because the restaurant's like, oh no, my new Google My Business lets me plug directly and I don't need an open table. Like I'll actually give Google a higher commission if I don't have to have open table in the middle, right? But wait a minute, open table has a lot of really great review information and that might not be there. Oh, well, Google can take care of that too. So you have some really fascinating dynamics that I think agency folks that are sort of a little bit both geeky and marketers, right, will be able to sort of have the forethought to guide the marketers through the maze of the next year or two. So the good news is that you and I will both have jobs for a little while longer, for sure, as it relates to web visibility, right, and maximizing web visibility both on a paid basis and earned basis.
Yeah, so I think the visibility thing is important, the being found thing, but I just don't want to use the word web. Not that the web's going away anywhere anytime soon,
Internet
but
visibility, how's that?
well, yeah. I mean, ultimately, it's all going to be driven by the internet and cloud. But like I say, I think the focus on as marketers of we do this and we have an ad spend. Oh, and by the way, let's pay some kid to do some SEO and drive traffic. And that's still the mentality with some people that SEO is about driving traffic. No, as the content experience becomes richer, you want to make sure that you're the guy who's providing it. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And one other thing I would point out, and I see this as a flaw in the way many businesses compartmentalize their business, is they sort of don't consider the product or service that they're delivering to be part of marketing, right? And if your product sucks or your service sucks, with even more frictionless data interchange throughout everything between social media and consumers leaving reviews or whatever, that's like your biggest potential headwind, right? Is it doesn't matter how much money you throw at marketing if you don't delight the customer at the product level, not just only in the SERP or not just only with your content, but you have to fulfill on your brand promise, right? And you see so many companies out there where it's almost like an afterthought. Oh yeah, I guess we shouldn't suck. Well, no, that should sort of start. That should be where you start. You should start with not sucking and being great at what it is you do and what it is that you provide to the consumer, because that actually results in the most organic of all kinds of visibility signals and quality signals, right? And you shouldn't have to work as hard if your product or service is delightful.
So there's a much longer conversation purely with as our marketing heads on here. You may have heard me say this before. I've said it, we still talk about digital marketing, and that drives me nuts. We're doing marketing. We're marketing in a digital world. Everything around you is digital. Nobody ever woke up before this happened. Like I worked, offline as we call it now. I didn't wake up in the morning and say, I'll do some analog marketing today. I just did marketing. We're marketing in a digital world. The toaster that you had your bagel from this morning was digital. Everything is digital. So here's my idea, and it's so radical, it scares the living daylights out of people. When you're talking to those larger organizations and you talk about compartmentalization, there's a word to practice on today. But when you talk about that, everything being in silos, my answer to that is take your entire budget, set it back to zero, just start again and see where you end up. See how much analog is in. It's all digital.
Yeah, and it was interesting because when I had the opportunity to acquire the eMarketing Association, I said to myself, well, everything's digital, everything's e-marketing now, so it's sort of superfluous, but I couldn't get the marketing association, so I was sort of stuck, acquiring the e-marketing association, and that still was where the sizzle was, 6 or 7 years ago, 6 or 7 years ago. And I think, there's still a lot of folks who have siloed their organizations and siloed their agencies and siloed, be thinking, oh, well,
Absolutely. Yeah.
I need a subject matter expert that just knows this little, myopic piece of the puzzle. Well, the reality is like those puzzle pieces are interacting more than they ever were before, right? You can't just crush it in one little puzzle piece.
Even when you talk about TV in the 30-second spot, and that one doesn't get in digital, it's in media over here, and it's recorded on a digital camera. It's edited on a digital editing suite. It is sent through a cloud server to a TV station, who then distributes it to your smart television. Everything, not an analog thing happened there, and yet it's still not in your digital marketing budget. What's
Yes,
going on, man? Anyway, we
absolutely.
digress.
Yes. So any final thoughts for those folks who stuck with us for the full hour, which we've still got the vast majority on? Okay, so how do they future-proof their business, right? AI is here to stay, and they want to make sure that, to the extent that it's possible, that they have an unfair advantage over their competition, because they do in fact have the best product or the best service. So how should they think through their strategy? Other than calling you and me, how should they think through their
That's the first
strategy?
thing. But I mean, that is an important point in that we spend our time looking at this and trying to get an idea of what's going to happen in the future. Why are we doing this? We're doing this to share with other people, to say, look, we can see around the curve in the road and tell you what's coming. So then at least you can begin to prepare for it. The most important advice is, I saw a list that had 10,000 different AI related products on it, a search engine and they're all just tapping into the same APIs and pulling things out. So, be careful on what it is that everybody's selling you. Bring in a specialist for whatever it is who's looking at that particular area. And even if you did have to break that down to what's the best AI technology being used for search, well, find somebody who does search and has already done that research. If it's for social, the same kind of thing, for creative, all of those kind of things. But don't get carried away in what I was saying before, in that you have to do everything and I have to do it now and I have to have the greatest AI technology, because the minute you get ahead of the customer, yeah, that's the wrong investment. You've got to be moving at the same time as the customers. Yes, you can lead them a little bit, but you don't want to be out there, a year before them, kind of thing. Goes back to what I was saying about Google, have all of this great technology they could roll out, but they're really careful at making sure they don't spend so much time and money rolling out something that's going to be useful in a year from now. Roll it out in a year from now.
I think that's a great word of wisdom, Mike, because a bunch of people jumped in and built storefronts in Second Life, and that wasn't, they didn't. In the end, the consumer needs to sort of, to some extent, lead you. You should be aware of where things might go, but you sort of have to wait till they reach critical mass before you start investing too heavily in them. And so that's where working with a great agency and great consultants can be super valuable.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Great conversation. I've really
Yeah,
enjoyed it.
absolutely. Thanks so much. And for those of us, those folks listening, both Mike and I are easy to find on LinkedIn, and you can certainly drop us a note there. Kevin at Did It works fine for me, as does Kevin at eMarketingassociation.com and Chelsea Digital. You
Mike
can
at Chelsea Digital. Look at that
absolutely.
digital words in there as well.
Whoops, too late. Well, you couldn't
Do
get Chelsea
it.
by itself, so that's taken.
Exactly. Well, even AI, sometimes I find in those LLM results, they'll talk about Chelsea Digital as a boutique digital agency who bought a new football player.
Yeah, another hallucination.
Completely confused with.
Yeah. Thanks so much,
Anyway, let's
Mike.
do this
Thanks
again
everyone
sometime. It's
for
been good.
if you put questions in, I'll shoot you back a note directly. Thanks again.
Kevin Lee's Power Marketing is available on all your favorite podcast networks. Kevin loves helping businesses excel at marketing. Having marketing challenges? Just like Santa in the Miracle on 34th Street, if Kevin can't help you, he'll know someone who can. Find him on LinkedIn, subscribe, or follow.